Hello! I'm Brian Miller, magician and motivational speaker. To my regular subscribers, thanks so much for sticking with me, and if you're new here, welcome to the channel. It's Friday, and that means it's time for a Q&A. And this is going to be a quick Q&A. I don't have a lot of time today. I have so many things to get ready for that you're probably going to see in the next vlog, whenever I next upload. It's going to be an insane weekend. Let's get into it. So I was actually sent a ton of questions over the course of the last week, and I'm going to pick out just one or two of them. This Q&A is mostly going to be for magicians and aspiring magicians. If you're not a magician or aspiring magician, or if you're not interested in kind of magic or magic theory, this Q&A is probably not for you. So a bunch of different college-aged aspiring magicians have seen my shows recently, have written to me, all independent from each other, asked me a bunch of questions. I'm just going to pick out one or two of them to answer in this video. So, first question. How do I present my magic in a more entertaining way? This is a big problem in the magic industry, particularly among younger magicians and those who are kind of just starting out in magic, which is you get really obsessed with the tricks, with the sleight of hand, with the technical skill. You become, there's a lot of magicians that have become phenomenal technicians, but their magic doesn't have any meaning behind it. They don't really connect with their audiences, and when you watch that kind of just sheer technical skill, it's interesting for about 5 minutes. And then after that, you're like, okay, but you know, I still need you to move me. I need you to make this meaningful to me. So if you know guitar, or if you know guitarists at all, if you play guitar, it's like kind of like the difference for me between Steve Vai and Joe Satriani. Steve Vai, technically a better guitarist than Joe Satriani. But Vai is really a technician. He doesn't write music that moves me. His songs, his work is all about really just showing off his guitar ability. Whereas Joe Satriani, also a virtuoso guitarist, maybe not technically as good as Vai, but he's still a virtuoso, and he writes music that's meaningful, that has feeling and kind of a story behind it. So making magic entertaining is... It seems like it would be an easy thing to do because magic is in and of itself is interesting, right? Impossible things that are happening in the real world seem like they would just be intrinsically interesting. But the truth is, you know, after you do one or two tricks, people are going to get bored if you're not giving them something more meaningful. I realize that none of that actually answered the question, though, of course. The question was, how do you do it? How do you make your magic more entertaining? And the best answer I can give you is to focus on the presentation and less on the props. Magicians tend to have trick-focused brains, where we think in terms of tricks. We think, if I'm gonna use cards and I'm gonna do a trick like this, and then they think, how do I create a presentation for that trick? My approach has always been the opposite way. I tend to think in presentation first and trick second. I think, I think of, oh, here's a theme that I'd like to explore, or here's a joke that I'd like to tell, or here's a funny moment that I'd like to get to, or here's an emotion that I'd like them to feel, right? I tend to think about that, and then I work backwards to figure out, now what trick would get me to that moment that I want to create? What trick would get me to that feeling that I want to give to my audience? So I know this is kind of a theoretical answer and it doesn't feel very practical or helpful, but if you start to think, instead of thinking prop, trick, presentation, you go the opposite way. You think presentation, trick, props, right? You go the opposite way. You start with presentation, then you figure out what trick, and then you deal with what the props are that you're going to need. That should help you out. Another question from the same gentleman, Philip, by the way. Thank you, Philip, for the questions, is how often do you change your show throughout the year? That's a great question. How often do I change my show throughout the year? Not often. Here's the catch-22 of being a full-time professional entertainer, is that the people who hire me, they don't want to be paying me to test out new material. When they hire me, they're hiring the show, they're hiring the act, they're hiring the guaranteed knockout show that I make a living doing. They're not paying me to test out new material. Every single client's opinion is that of, test out new stuff on your own time, not on our time, and certainly not on our dime, right? So rightfully so, they don't want you to be, trying something new and bombing it in front of their, in front of their audience after they've paid all this money to have you there and set up this event. The problem is, because every client feels that way, it becomes very difficult to test out new material. When you're just starting, when you're new, when you're younger, when you're a kid, you're given a lot more leeway. Like when I could test out new stuff when I was in college doing magic for, doing shows for $200 for local companies, or, for just small local, like they were just happy to be supporting a young kid who was pursuing his dream. And so there was a lot less, they didn't have this professional standard that they were holding me to, that of course they do now. So I don't change my show often, and I know that many of my friends and colleagues in the industry, fellow magicians, mentalists and variety artists, feel the same way. Slightly different, I think, for comedians, because comedians tend to be able to test out a new joke, like, which is just like a quick setup and punchline. They can test out some of the new material by sandwiching it in between a bunch of other jokes that work, because people don't expect every single solitary joke in an entire hour of comedy to be hilarious. Nobody has that expectation. But in magic, in an hour, I'm only doing maybe 8 tricks technically, because it's more about presentation when I'm on stage. If one of those 8 tricks fails or doesn't go over well or doesn't work, that's a huge portion of the show. So the way that I work is, every summer when I'm not doing my major touring stuff, I work out 2 or 3 new ideas for the stage, and I work them out at some of the local events, some of the charity stuff, some of the volunteer events where I'm not being held to quite as high a standard. I'm still going to deliver a killer show, but I'm in more casual environments. Also, for real regular clients of mine, people who know me really well and we've been working together a long time, often they're thrilled to see me working out some new material. They think it's interesting to watch the process and see it develop. So I'll test out 2 or 3 new pieces over the course of a summer, decide on one of them, and then really workshop it and rehearse it and script it and block it and stage it and all that stuff, and get it ready for the start of my fall tour. And then I'll do what I mentioned comedians do earlier, is I'll stick it kind of in the middle of the show, sandwiched in between 2 knockout pieces. So pretty much once a year, one new piece will go into my show, and I'll do that through the fall and spring tour. Right in the middle of that monologue, the memory card ran out of space. So I had to just delete a couple of things to finish doing this, and I think that's as good a cue as any that I've been spending too much time doing this as it is. I need to get this onto the computer, edit, upload it, schedule it for Friday. It's Friday when you're watching this, or anyway, it goes up on Friday, but I have so many things to do today. I have a crazy weekend ahead. Craziness. So thanks very much for sticking with me, and always remember that our world is a shared experience. And it's also very busy, so I gotta go. Bye.